Welcome to Junior Historians. I'm Darcy, from the middle school librarian at the St. Charles Public Library. Joining me is Dr. Steve Smunt from the St. Charles Historic Preservation Commission. Today we're exploring the history of our city as a streetcar suburb.
Thank you, Darcy. We're actually standing on the northwest corner of Illinois and 3rd Street, and we're on the northwest corner. Just to our right is the Howard House Hotel that dates back to 1848, where Mary Lincoln was a guest. But during the time of the streetcar era, it was called the Atwood House, and the streetcars traveled along 3rd Street, which is right behind us, as they headed southbound to Geneva.
Dr. Steve, you previously shared with us in a different video how the dam and mills were established along the Fox River. Can you tell us how that industrial development impacted our city and workers?
Well, in St. Charles, water-powered industry continued to flourish, but there was an expansion of the factories away from the river, and they used coal-fired steam boilers to provide the power to run the factories. And many of the working-class factory workers actually walked to work. They didn't have the convenience of horse ownership necessarily, and there was no public transportation.
So workers needed a better way to be able to access jobs farther from their homes. What happened to allow for easier transportation?
Well, in the 1890s, there was a growth spurt in St. Charles. And this coincided with the development of the streetcar suburbs. Now, the electric streetcar or trolley allowed people to travel in 10 minutes what it took to walk in 30 minutes. By 1890, the streetcar lines began to foster a tremendous expansion in residential growth throughout the country. The older cities in the electric trolleys began to replace horse-pulled streetcars, and these trolleys were able now to expand their systems into the outlying areas outside and away from the downtowns. As the streetcar system expanded, so did the availability of land, which allowed for some residential development.
So how did that directly affect those living in St. Charles?
Well, specifically in St. Charles, back in 1896, an Elgin streetcar line ran between Elgin. It was extended south and ran between Elgin and St. Charles. And an Aurora streetcar line was extended north through Batavia, and they joined together, and it was called the Elgin, Aurora, and Southern Traction Company. This electric trolley operated between the adjacent cities of Carpentersville, Elgin, St. Charles, Geneva, Batavia, Aurora, all the way down to Yorkville, Illinois.
Wow.
And now from Elgin, I'm going to describe the route. Elgin, as it traveled southbound, it entered St. Charles near North Cemetery on 5th Avenue. And it traveled southbound on 5th Avenue to East Main Street. Now at East Main Street, it turned westward and traveled across the Fox River to 3rd Street. And at 3rd Street, it turned again southbound and headed towards Geneva down South 3rd Street.
So that's
now,
right here.
Behind us. And that intersection of 3rd and Main Street was called Whiskey Bend because of the number of saloons that bounded the curve in the railway on each side of the roadways. Now, the electric train was able to stop just about at every corner if a person wanted to ride the train, or it could let off passengers at every block throughout the city of St. Charles. Now, after World War I, the Fox River Interurban Line was renamed Aurora, Elgin, and Fox River Electric, and it operated until 1935. Now, there was one more electric railway that operated in St. Charles, and it shared the same streetcar tracks with the Fox River line. It was called the Aurora, Elgin, and Chicago Railway, and at one time they were jointly owned by the same company. And that train operated from St. Charles into Chicago.
Wow.
Now, the electric interurban that allowed for working commuters to start living farther and farther away from downtown St. Charles, where they could look for opportunities to buy property and build residences a greater distance out of the city center.
That's great that the people at the time had more options of where they could live. How did that impact housing in our city?
Well, St. Charles started growing in 1890, and for those 4 decades from 1890 to 1930 was a dominant era of home construction, especially south of downtown. Now, if we were to travel south on 3rd Street, there's 2 additions to the original town of St. Charles, Moody's addition and Wilcox's addition. These neighborhoods had developed with much narrower lots that faced the street, and they also had alleyways where they could have a carriage barn for a horse or a garage. And all these neighborhoods were within walking distance, about 10-minute walking distance of the streetcar line. So this allowed workers to live farther away from downtown but have the convenience of public transportation to take them to the factories.
That's great. Obviously, we don't still have streetcars running through town now. What happened to the streetcar line?
Well, even though we know that electric transportation was very efficient, the development of the personal automobile began to make inroads into their streetcar business. And Henry Ford's revolutionary mass production of the Model T, along with paved highways and country roads, really doomed the streetcar lines. People were able to now ride personal transportation in place of public transportation to and from work. So as we saw a decline in the electric trolley lines, we saw an increase in the personal transportation of automobiles and the development of automobile suburbs that relied solely on automobiles for their transport needs.
That's really awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us?
Yeah, I wanted to make a mention that if we were to look at 3rd Street here and travel south, 1 block south of here, you can clearly see where the streetcar tracks were in the middle of the roadway and they paved over them. So there's a hump in the pavement. And if you were to walk down to Indiana and 3rd Street, you can clearly see the hump in the road.
That's really cool. Let's walk down there.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Steve, for sharing your knowledge with the junior historians. Now join me as I head back to the St. Charles History Museum and talk to Lindsay Judd, the director, about some of the museum's holdings.
Welcome back to the St. Charles History Museum. Here on display in our exhibit gallery is an oversized photo of the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin trolley, car number 412, awaiting departure. This photo was taken on October 30th, 1937. You can see this on display here at the St. Charles History Museum. Don't forget to get your grab-and-go kit here at the St. Charles History Museum while supplies last.